RJ Eskow, and we are back at the back on whatever this show is called, the Zero Hour. That's what it's called, and we're glad to have you back. You know what? We talked with Ernie Powell in the last hour, activist and organizer, about the power of determined people sitting in and making a difference and striking and organizing. And that used to happen much more in our society. It used to happen in the university world too. It's still happening. At Washington University in St. Louis, students were sitting in to protest the university's relationship with Peabody Energy and Peabody Coal. We have one of the organizers of that demonstration with us today, a junior at Washington University, Julia Ho. Julia, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for your good work too. Now, you guys were sitting in. Tell us a little bit about that and the current state of your action. First, tell us about the action, and then we'll talk about why.
Yeah. So we're Students Against Peabody. Basically, our mission is to pressure the university to cut ties with Peabody Energy, which is the largest private sector coal corporation in the world, and whose CEO sits on our board of trustees and also gives millions of dollars to fund clean coal research here. So we don't think that's right. We think that corporate interests on our board shouldn't dictate what our research goes towards, and also that in both the social and environmental injustices that Peabody has caused through their business practices are not something that align with our university's mission. So that's basically what we're about. Over the past 18, 17 days, we were sitting in Brookings Hall, which is the administration's office, and basically demanding a few different things. One, that the university take a public stance on having CEO Greg Boyce on their board, that they go on community tours of extraction sites to see sort of the extent of the damage that Peabody is causing to a lot of these communities, and also to create a mechanism whereby students can have more voice on the board. So over the last 17 days, these demands have changed a lot. They've gone through negotiations a lot. But essentially what happened is on Monday, the university came out with a public statement and said, had a very, very watered down version of our demands and, refused to go on community tours, refused to take a public stance. Their public statement did not even say Peabody in it once, but instead offered to do things like host symposiums on corporate social responsibility and such. So, since then, we definitely haven't given up, but we have recognized that the university has only, or our chancellor, even though he does have the power to make these decisions, really does have he has his hands tied by these corporations. And at the end of the day, he really it's clear that he's more accountable to them than he is to us. So I think
let's talk about that for a second,
yeah.
if I can jump in there, Julia.
Oh, sure.
We're talking to Julia Ho, one of the organizers of a student demonstration against the cozy corporate relationships at Washington University, especially with Peabody Coal. And okay, so you said at one point you had negotiations, and was it during the course of these negotiations that you concluded that your chancellor didn't have the ability to meet your demands, or did you decide that whether or not he has the ability, he's not willing to defy the corporate interests on his board or the corporate funders of the university, or how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so basically, like I said, we were sitting in for 17 days straight. We got a meeting with the chancellor within 4 days of sitting in, but it was clear at that first meeting that they weren't really ready to listen to us. And then over the course of the next week and a half, we really went through a series of meetings with them where we were working on our demands, and we were actually at a point where it seemed like they were really concerned about extraction sites. They were showing concern for a lot of the things that we were, but they weren't giving us anything in writing. So whenever we came back on Sunday night and we basically said, this is what we're willing to do, this is what we want to break camp, are you willing to give it to us? And basically they came back and said no. So from that, although sitting in was an extremely effective strategy for us in bringing people together who care about this issue, in raising the profile around this issue, and also questioning not just the corporate, not just Peabody, but also a lot of the other corporate interests on our board, like Monsanto, like Arch Coal, like Boeing, and Bank of America, all of these things. We think it was a very effective strategy for that, but in the end, sitting in was only going to do so much to push our administration, and so at this point, we're at a point in our campaign where we're moving forward and basically going straight to the Board of Trustees and going straight to Greg Boyce, who's going to be here next week on May 1st for a Board of Trustees meeting.
Now, who's Greg Boyce?
So Greg Boyce is the CEO of Peabody Energy, and he has been on our board since 2009.
So we're talking with Julia Ho, one of the organizers of student protest against corporate influence in Washington University in St. Louis. As I know you know, Julia, I'm pretty sure you know, your university is not unique in its increasing dependence on corporate funders, which brings along with it an increasing eagerness to please the corporations, maybe change the curriculum and or
Mhm.
the research projects to attract and retain corporate money. And we see in Syracuse University is very much in bed with J.P. Morgan Chase, the criminally inclined serial corporate offender bank, and have had Jamie Dimon, the CEO, as their speaker, and a business school that's basically a feeder system for J.P. Morgan Chase, on and on and on. So this is a national problem of universities getting in bed with corporations. Have you guys given any thought, in addition to the things you were planning to do, of maybe reaching out to students on other campuses?
Oh, absolutely. We've already gotten a lot of support from students all across Missouri who are very inspired by what we're doing, and we're hoping that this action is really part of a larger divestment movement and part of a sort of an escalation in the divestment movement, and thinking not a little bit past purely divestment, but also thinking towards social responsibility. And so, a lot of people ask, like, why Peabody? Why not go after Monsanto? Why not go after all these other corporate interests on your board? And really, the reason is because Peabody has a long history of draining, of having influence not just over Washington University, but also over the city of St. Louis. And so, Peabody is a major funder of many, many social institutions here, like our zoo, our opera house, our science center, all of these things that they give funding for. And we're really questioning that and wondering, should we be relying on these corporations, and particularly Peabody, which has a long history of violating workers' rights, of displacing people from their homes, of displacing tens of thousands of Native Americans from their homes, of destroying public health, of environmental degradation, all of these things. We don't think that that our university's well-being should be dependent on these corporations, and we don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, see, I think your choice of Peabody was very, very smart, because it's very important, as you know, when you're trying to mobilize people, which is what any action like yours is designed to do, and change their way of thinking, to pick a target that is close to people's lives. So you're there in Missouri, you're there in St. Louis, the Peabody name is everywhere, the Peabody corporate presence is there, the Peabody impact on the environment is nearby. So I think you chose very wisely. And I guess the question now going forward is, and by the way, I do want to say, you mentioned the phrase social responsibility. I don't have to tell you, but be wary when they say, oh, we'll get involved with corporate social responsibility. That's usually tax deductible publicity raising feel good programs that the corporation runs. So you know that. So you'll go into that cautiously. But going forward, what are you guys going to be doing? We got about, I guess, a minute and a half left. What's your group planning for? I know you're reaching out to these other places, and you got anything else in mind? You've moved out of the administration building.
Yeah. So May 1st, which is next Thursday, there's actually going to be, like I said, a board of trustees meeting on our campus, where Greg Boyce is going to physically be here. And so we are basically challenging him and saying, challenging a university, but also directly challenging Greg Boyce, saying, what are you doing? What are you doing to our city? What are you doing to our schools here? They've diverted millions of dollars from public schools here in the city. And so, that's sort of the next step in our campaign. And we know that we're going against a corporate giant. It's the largest private sector corporation in the world, and we don't have we don't expect to end Peabody now, but we do want to, at least, like I said, really start this conversation about corporate interests on our board and corporate interests in our cities. And, what good are they actually doing us in the end? And so I think that this is part of, like I said, a much larger narrative, hopefully something that will happen nationwide, and not just among students, but among, all members of the community.
Well, good luck to you on that. And since May 1st is May Day, it's also our official launch date for this program. We're doing some events around that. I'll tell you what, why don't you or someone else from your group come on the show on May 2nd and tell us how it went?
Yeah, we'd love to do that.
It's a deal. All right, we've been speaking with Julia Ho about their great student action at Washington University in St. Louis. The kids are all right, as the song goes. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week.
Okay, great. Sounds awesome.
I'm RJ Eskow, and we will be right back on the Zero Hour.